Leviticus chapter 25 verse 44 can be a difficult passage for modern readers. It states, "As for your male and female slaves whom you may have, you may buy male and female slaves from among the nations that are around you." This verse is part of a larger section in Leviticus. This section outlines the laws for the ancient Israelites. These laws concern land ownership, the year of Jubilee, and servitude. To understand this verse, we need to consider its context. This includes the historical, cultural, and theological background. Slavery was common in the ancient Near East. Its form and function varied between cultures. In Israel, slavery was often more like servitude or bonded labor. Laws were established to regulate it. This distinguished it from the harsher slavery practiced in surrounding nations. Leviticus chapter 25 verse 44 allows Israelites to buy slaves from other nations. Earlier verses like Leviticus chapter 25 verses 39 to 43 detail protections for fellow Israelites who became servants. Israelite servants were to be treated like hired workers. They were to be released in the year of Jubilee. This was a year of economic reset. The distinction between Israelite and foreign servants is important. Foreigners could be subjected to permanent slavery. Israelites were to be released during the Jubilee year. This system is complex. It had lasting impacts on labor practices. The historical context of land ownership and economics also played a role in servitude. In ancient Israel, land was a crucial asset. It was connected to inheritance and tribal identity. Economic hardship could force people to sell their land. Sometimes they even sold themselves into servitude to survive. The year of Jubilee aimed to prevent permanent landlessness and poverty. It also provided a chance for those in servitude to regain their freedom. The theological implications of servitude in ancient Israel are significant. The Israelites believed they had a unique covenant relationship with God. This relationship influenced their treatment of one another. Foreign slaves were not part of this covenant. This partially explains the difference in their treatment. Biblical laws about slavery are often seen as regulatory rather than prescriptive. They aim to mitigate the harshness of a widespread institution. They set limits on its practice in a fallen world. The concept of servitude in the Old Testament also has theological weight. It symbolizes humanity's relationship with God. Israel is often called God's servant. This highlights the idea of willing submission and obedience to God's will. The laws concerning slavery in Leviticus were primarily regulatory. They aimed to mitigate the harshness of an existing institution. They provided a framework for the treatment of slaves. This framework outlined certain rights and protections. This was especially true for Israelite servants. Modern readers often struggle with verses like Leviticus chapter 25, verse 44. The horrors associated with slavery, especially the transatlantic slave trade, are difficult to reconcile with any notion of permitted slavery. It's important to interpret these texts within their historical framework. We must also recognize that the Bible's overall message moves toward freedom and equality. This culminates in the New Testament. Galatians chapter 3 verse 28 and the book of Philemon are good examples of this. Interpreting Leviticus chapter 25 verse 44 in the modern world presents ethical challenges. The horrors of chattel slavery have shaped our understanding of slavery as inherently immoral. It's essential to avoid imposing modern values onto ancient texts. However, we must also acknowledge the ethical concerns this verse raises. Several approaches can help navigate this complexity. We can use a historical, cultural approach. This means understanding the historical and cultural context of the verse. We can also use a theological, ethical approach. This means examining the broader theological message of the Bible. This message is one of greater freedom and equality. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment with your favorite Bible verse.